Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Healing Doesn't Have to Be Heavy podcast. I'm your host, Angie Berrett, and I'm so excited to have you with us today. I am a trauma informed coach, a play expert, I'm a registered nurse, and I'm also a child abuse survivor. As I was on my healing journey, working to overcome years of child abuse, I felt like things were so heavy and I was in this pit of despair. And I didn't see much hope or much joy as I was learning how to navigate life. And it wasn't until I found play and movement that my life changed. Play and movement became this outlet for me to release the stored trauma, release the negative things, and tap into feelings and sensations and create a life that I wanted. I now work with women to help them use play and movement to connect to their bodies, releasing limiting self beliefs, stress, anxiety, tension, depression, and trauma. And my podcast is to bring people to you who have their own stories, who have their own healing modalities, and who hopefully can help you find some spark, some lightness, some joy, some glimmer of healing doesn't have to be heavy on your journey. And I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest. He has some amazing insights, and I cannot wait to jump into them. So, Barry Lipscomb, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Angie. It's great to be here with you.
Barry, it's so nice to have you here. So tell us about you, what you do, and tell us about you.
Sure. My pleasure. Well, first, it's great to be with your guest and have a chance to have a conversation with you. I practice across a couple of different modalities. All of them have shamanism in some way at their core. So I am a depth hypnosis practitioner. I'm a shamanic counselor. I'm a focalizing practitioner. And I am also an executive coach. So I work both with people individually to heal and transform what's limiting them in their personal lives, but also with leaders who are wanting to bring these type of mindfulness and innate wisdom tools into their leadership. And that comes from years of being a business executive myself. So I have a lot of business experience. I kind of straddle the two worlds of business and capitalism, and then also the more spiritual and healing side of things. So I am a two-spirited person in that way. And I came to this work through my own personal journey, which I think lots of people do. We dive into tools, we learn to use them ourselves, and then as we find ourselves healed, we want to bring that to other people. And in my
Absolutely.
case,
Barry, I'm going to interrupt you really fast, and
yeah,
I'm so sorry for this. I forgot to add a slight disclaimer at the beginning. I was so excited to start talking to you. So I
yeah.
just want to say, before we get too much more into Barry's story, we are going to be talking about mental health. We're going to be talking about substance abuse addiction and some other types of trauma. So if you find yourself starting to get triggered, really uncomfortable, anything like that, step back, take care of yourself, do some sort of grounding work. And then I really invite you to come back because Barry has a really interesting and unique perspective and take on things. And he's got a really interesting story that I can't wait for y'all to share. So I invite you to come back when you're ready, but just take care of yourself. So I apologize, Barry, for interrupting you. Having said that, tell us about your story and how you got into this work.
Sure. And thanks for the disclaimer. It's always important that we are grounded and we take care of ourselves and that we're prepared to hear things that might be triggering for us. So thanks for the reminder for your guest. So in my case, I am a gay man of a certain age. I was born in the 60s, was a child of the 70s, and grew up in the rural South of Virginia. And what that meant in my life experience was that as a young child, began to have feelings of attraction to other men, I had no external reference for that whatsoever. I felt as if, there was no internet. There was like nothing. So
You
it
had the
felt
people around you.
nothing, right?
Yes.
And I was in a conservative fundamentalist church, which, was giving the judgment on top of that. So it was both very isolating. It also caused me to go within myself very deeply. And years later, I realized I began creating some internalized homophobia
Mhm.
and just self-loathing, self-questioning. And my coming out journey wasn't until into my mid-20s when I finally came out. And I did that by kind of self-medicating. First by drinking socially, but that very quickly made connecting much easier. So it very quickly went from, drinking socially to anytime I drink, I would drink till I was drunk.
Yes.
And when we have these spiritual maladies that we're trying to medicate with substances, it's not enough. So
No.
So, the alcohol became drugs, became harder drugs. And throughout all of that, it was all wrapped within sexual compulsion, like this
Mhm.
just yearning. If someone would want me, then this part of myself that feels so empty would be okay. So I'm putting drugs, alcohol, anonymous sex, and
Yes.
compulsive sex into this hole in me, and it's not doing any good.
It
But
almost makes you feel more empty.
you're right, the way it is, because over time, for sure, because these things, at first they kind of work, but the thing that you're trying to accommodate isn't getting satiated by those things.
Right.
So as I got later into my 30s and into my early 40s, all that just started coming to a head. It just, it got to where the all-night benders, I couldn't go to work the next day. Just I wasn't able to show up. So it kind of got to a breaking point. And for me, I needed to extricate myself from my life and go into a rehab program and just kind of like take stock, reset things. And I was fortunate to find a facility in Minnesota that specializes in LGBTQ people. It's specialized in that. And within that, there is a whole program that was for dual diagnosed gay men who were substance abuse addiction as well as sexual compulsive. So we worked on both of those two things together in a company of
Mhm.
other men who were having that experience. And at the time, I lived in New York City, and there were several other New Yorkers in my cohort. So I connected with them. We became friends and supported one another once we were back in the city. And as part of coming back into my life in the city, I needed to find a therapist. This was like one of the grace moments of my life and of my journey. I found a therapist who used a somatic process
Mhm.
in his healing. And what was interesting about that is that throughout this whole period of addiction escalating, I was also on a deep spiritual journey. I was going on 10-day silent meditation retreats. I was, studying deep principles of Eastern philosophy and deep spirituality. So I knew that intellectually I was understanding those things I was studying, but I could have a great experience 10 days at the ashram. But when I was losing it by the time I drove to the airport.
Yeah.
I couldn't sustain that in my life. So I knew that there was something that needed to shift for me to be able to make my intellectual experience experiential.
Mhm.
And Dr. Michael Pacucci, who I found when I came back into New York after my rehab experience, and his somatic experience, which he calls focalizing, which is I'm now certified in myself, is a way in which, even in Michael's psychotherapy practice, he has the moniker beyond talk therapy.
Mhm.
Because when we work somatically, we do not have to go back into the event that triggered us. We don't even have to know what it is. We just need to find where in our body there's frozen energy in our nervous system. They got frozen through some either physical or emotional trauma. And I kind of want to inject there emotional trauma, while subtle, is just as damaging to us as physical trauma is. It's just harder to point to because it's repetitive, it happens over time. So that's what focalizing does.
I'm going to say, I'm going to interject really quickly. I think emotional trauma is more damaging even than the physical trauma. And I
Yeah.
say that because I experienced both. And I was in an abusive marriage. And I used to always say, God, I just wish my ex-husband at the time would hit me because then that would give me a definitive
Mm,
point where I could leave. And yet the
right.
emotional stuff, it was, did I take that wrong? What's wrong with me? He's such a great
Yeah.
person. And so I think the emotional is almost more harmful because the physical, there's kind of a clear cut, it's easier to pinpoint, whereas the emotional can be more insidious. And I agree with you. Our body is going to respond the same way to
Yeah.
trauma. And so we have the same response internally, just we tend to, I definitely, in my clients that I work with, the emotional stuff, we then tend to add that self critic component on top of it, that self hate
Yeah.
component.
Right.
So,
And we
anyway,
add shame to the thing. Like,
yes, yes.
how can I let myself put up with this? Like,
What's
and then
wrong
you're
with me? Why
swirling.
is this
Yeah.
bothering me? Yeah, all of that.
Totally. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Keep going. I just
No,
wanted
please
to,
jump
yeah.
in like that whenever you have something to add. It's great. So focalizing helps you first find in your body where that frozen energy in your nervous system is somatically, just through the felt sense. And then we also find in the body some type of resource energy, which has the qualities of unconditional love, non-judgment, our most authentic self. And focalizing helps us bring the two things together. And when we do, it's almost like an alchemy. When we do, something third emerges. And generally, once that process is underway, the client, myself, in the cases where I've done this, begins to experience tingling in your body because your
Mm.
energy system is throwing off that trauma. It's throwing off that stored, your nervous system is unfreezing in a place. And Michael's point of view, Dr. Pacucci, was that when we unfreeze these frozen energy are blocking the flow of source energy through our system. And when we unfreeze that, source energy flows naturally. And then at that point, it's not even an effort to do the things we want to do because we're now our most authentic self and we're able to just access greater capabilities that were shut off by the trauma. So that's really when my journey started to unfold, and I saw change in myself, and then that intellectual experience I had for so many years began to become real. And over time of working with Michael, I eventually he took me in as a mentee and taught me to be a focalizer myself. That was a period of time I was the executive director of his nonprofit, and we kind of revamped his 30 years of study, and we gave workshops together in New York, and we co-wrote a book together. And it was a great experience, and it kind of got me more grounded um, in um, in healing for myself, and then offering it to other people. Um, then you have kind of in my story, I have to fast forward a couple of years because that kind of trucks along for a while. And I move around the country a little bit. I'm in Michigan for a couple of years, then I land in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I find a school of consciousness studies there. And this is my probably second great teacher after Dr. Pacucci is Isa Chikardi, and this was the foundation of the Sacred Stream. And she is a school of conscious studies, and she teaches a methodology that she synthesized called depth hypnosis. And that methodology is a synthesis of both the ancient wisdom of Buddhist psychology and shamanism, but through the contemporary lens of transpersonal psychology and hypnotherapy. So the catalytic engine that's running in depth hypnosis is shamanism, but we're accessing it through a hypnotherapy trance, a guided meditation.
Huh, what an interesting combination.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes it accessible. And I think it's worth mentioning in Issa's own work, she came to that approach for a number of different reasons because she really felt for individual healing to really work, agency had to really be in the client themselves. So in typical Ericksonian hypnotherapy, if you come to me and you want weight loss or, smoking cessation, you flip through the book and there's a script and we're just like, we're going to do the script. And
Okay.
that does work. But Isa felt it took agency away from the client themselves by, laying this script on top of them without them having any interplay into the script itself. And then similarly, she felt similar about shamanism. Whereas, typically when you work with a shaman, you go to the shaman, you present, what's going on, and the shaman goes on a journey to their helping spirits and brings back the part of you that you've lost, and then blows that back into your body, and then you go on your way restored. So, so what depth hypnosis does is make this an integrated experience, an applied experience for the client so that the scripts that are used are their own words based on what they want out of their life around this situation. And even when we use shamanic processes, it's interactive. They're experiencing it as I, as a depth hypnosis practitioner, am experiencing it with them. So I think if it's helpful, I'd like to share the shamanic perspective on trauma, if you think that would be helpful.
Please. In fact, I was just about to say, for people who don't know much about shamanistic work and practices, how does that impact, how does that play into trauma? So you actually were going right where I was about to ask.
Okay. Well, I
Hmm.
mean, I appreciate the question too, because it caused me to back up because, I assume a certain, understanding that's probably good to step back. So at its most basic, here's how I define shamanism. So the shaman is just one who makes the unseen seen. And what's interesting about shamanism is that it's centuries old,
Mhm.
and it if people who have anthropologists who have studied cultures around the world, very similar practices in the spiritual and psychological well-being of native communities emerged very similarly. So, that alone adds a validity to shamanism for me, that you
Mhm.
can look at the shamanic traditions of Hawaii, Mexico, Scotland, the deserts of Saudi Arabia, or the Far East, and you see these same tools and belief systems and understandings. Um, and shamanism is also a very nature-based system of working, so that nature is alive.
Yes.
And there is in nature, there are helping spirits that we can access, and they can help us on a healing journey. Um, so that's kind of like basics shamanism 101. Does that leave you with any, did I say enough, or does it leave you with questions before I get into shamanism and trauma?
No, I guess the one question that I would ask is for people who don't have experience with shamanism or working in that type of realm, who are in a very, how do I want to say this? Judeo-Christian realm. How do you work with people, or how would you bridge that gap for people who don't have an understanding into that, but who are more in the Judeo-Christian realm and belief system? How do you bridge that for anybody who's listening who may just kind of think, oh, we're getting into an area that's uncomfortable for me?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking that. So there's a number of different ways. On the one hand, if someone is in a Judeo Christian background and they have a belief in angels, we can think of
Mm.
angels as helping spirits or saints. We can think of it that way. In fact, oftentimes working with someone that has a strong faith like that, their helping spirits show up
Mm-hmm.
as different saints or deities or angels. In all the work, the other way that I would say that someone could experience it within their own belief system is that all this is done within a guided meditation, so we could also just view the experience as metaphoric.
Mm-hmm.
That the guide that is showing up as a wizard has the qualities of magic and this, and so what is that telling me about that and the issue I'm working with? We can use it metaphorically, um, and that works as well.
I love that. That's fantastic. And a great bridge, because I think that so often people who are in a very fundamental Judeo-Christian world and have grown up in that, I grew up in that environment. It was very hard for me to start to accept believing in things that weren't in that religious sphere. So thank you
Right.
for bridging that. That's a great way. Now, I would love to have you explain shamanism and trauma in the body. How do they interact or interplay?
Yeah, so the shamanic perspective on trauma is what shamanic practice calls soul loss,
Mm.
and what the shamanic practice calls power loss. Now, soul loss is, from the shamanic perspective, that some event or trauma happens, and that for your spirit to survive, some piece of your spirit left and didn't find its way back. Because there's many times we have an experience where, like, our system kind of disorients, but it comes back together on its own. So this is a case where a piece of our spirit left and didn't find its way back. It could be a traumatic automobile accident.
Hmm.
It could be some type of a physical assault. It could be an abuse situation, something that happened that was physically traumatic, and a part just it was you know you have to set a part of yourself aside to just make it through the thing, and then that part never made its way back. From a power loss perspective, that is more like the slow draining of your power. So if you think that many spiritual systems have the belief that there is an energy system in our body.
Hmm.
In the Eastern tradition, we talk about chi.
Yeah.
uh, there's a number of ways to think about that. In yoga, you're always raising your body's energy. That's yoga is a practice of energizing your body. So that energy system is something that's constantly, replenishing itself, discharging energy, getting depleted, in this constant state. But a power loss state is where something has happened, generally over time. So, like being in a verbally abusive relationship is a perfect place that power loss is likely going to happen because day in, day out, the partner is denigrating or chastising or using violent language
Hmm.
that you're not able to defend yourself against for whatever reason. And therefore, your energy and your power is just draining. In my case, alcohol, like substance abuse, is a
Okay.
major power loss thing because, and compulsive sex, because you take this alcohol, these drugs, you open your energy system up wide, you come into, relationship, into sexual relationship with another human being with all their stuff. And so both your energy systems are burst wide open, and you're just like energy's going like this between you, and you're taking on their bad stuff. And it's
Yes.
like, it's from an energy perspective, it's a mess.
Right.
So, from a shamanic perspective, we have soul loss and we have power loss. And there are ways in which we can, through these shamanic processes, bring that soul part back that was lost, and we can bring that power back into balance. And maybe an example we have, could I
Yes, that would be great.
in soul loss, generally that's done through some type of an age regression. So we'll go into, a light meditative trance on whatever the issue is we're working on. And we may, begin to explore, when was the first or earliest time that you remember that happening? And we're in a light trance. So, our kind of thinking mind is kind of pushed to the back and our more emotional, imaginative mind is forward. And invariably, a childhood memory will come up,
Mhm.
that, and then we'll go to that memory and talk to that child through the adult you are now and understand what that child is experiencing, what just happened, how is it internalizing, what thoughts are they having, what beliefs are they developing about themselves, what conclusions about the world are they coming to. We'll have a dialogue with the younger child. But we'll do that with the adult there as the adult they are now, the child. So the adult is both talking the adult side and the child side.
So more
And
like kind of a independent observer conversationalist. They're not necessarily feeling the experience. They're letting the child feel it.
right,
They're
they're
looking at
they're
it from a
feeling their
grown-up
experience as
perspective.
an adult,
Okay.
observing this. And then because we're working shamanically in the work we've done up to that point, we've connected with some type of inner guidance, a part of yourself that really has only your highest good as their soul intent. That's the way we think about that. So we also bring the guide there. And that brings this field of compassion, non-judgment that allows everyone to kind of soften around the event. And we first start the conversation just by asking the adult, how do you feel observing this? And almost invariably, there is some degree of compassion
Hmm.
for that younger child. And then that helps the child feel seen. And we just facilitate a dialogue back and forth between the younger child and the adult self until that younger child begins to feel resolution and that seeing that life turned out, the way it did, that they're still alive, they're still functioning, and bringing some healing to that memory.
Hmm.
And then we actually have that young child fold itself into the heart of the adult,
Mm.
which helps bring that, because we'll be, from a shamanic perspective, there's a soul loss there, like a piece of that person's soul was left with that event. So we're now bringing it back into their current experience. And then we use everything that was said during the session when we do the count out, and we use suggestion hypnosis to just reinforce what are the, what maybe did that adult say to that younger self? Like, oh, you think, like it's, you have no idea how this is going to turn out, or the person you're going to become, or, I know that you can find in yourself the confidence that that you need, or that, you're going to, this abuse is going to end and you're going to find a way to be a loving person, or, whatever they might say
Hmm.
in that conversation gets woven into the suggestion hypnosis of the conversation coming out.
So it sounds like that when you're working with the adult, I'm going to use the term parts because that's actually how so my therapist did a similar type of practice. We would go in and work with the part of my child, my child part. And so for me, it made more sense to think in terms of parts of myself
Sure.
because
Yeah.
um, it's common vernacular to say part of me feels this, part of me feels that. And so we do have parts, so it sounds like you are helping people as their grown-up self be the adult around this wounded child part that they didn't have to allow them to heal. Correct?
Yeah, that is certainly a way to look at it in the presence of this loving, compassionate guide as well. Like there's the three
The
there that
three.
are working
Okay, yeah.
together.
That's fantastic for so many of our listeners. How many times have you had a wounded part inside of you, or you carry a negative belief and you just think, God, if only I'd had an adult around me who would have taught me
Yes.
X, Y, or Z when I was growing up, that would have been so much easier. I've thought that and said that a million times. And so
Yeah.
it sounds like you're helping through this meditative state, the hypnosis, helping that guide, that loving self-compassion, the adult part and the child all find a way to heal and to be together.
Yes. That's a perfect way to synthesize it. Yeah, that's pretty much what happens.
That's so powerful. How do you work with people who seem to feel or have some resistance to that? Because sometimes, as we're going into those really deep wounds, or we're working to find a part that is carrying something that's so painful, our body and our nervous system has built up so many walls, to protect us from feeling that. How do you help people get into that without it feeling so heavy?
Yeah. Really a couple of different things. So that presence of that guide really, the first time that a client connects with that guide, that alone is an
Uh,
amazing healing experience.
mhm.
Because I often tell clients, it's kind of like, can you remember as a child when you just had this sense of wonder or magic in the world? And life experience, we lost that.
Mhm.
We lose it even in our early childhood, but certainly by the time that we're, adults with all our responsibilities. That's kind of what we're going to go back and reconnect with. That part of ourselves that, unconditionally loves us, is completely non-judgmental, completely holds the possibility for us authentically. And being in that field of compassion allows us to look at things we might not otherwise be able to look at. So that's kind of like step one in. Now, for many of us, we've actually built a pattern of resistance
Yes.
that alone isn't enough for, because that's something that a place we actually have to start working and healing. It's the pattern of resistance before we can get to the thing that caused the pattern of resistance.
Yes.
So we just step in where the client's at, you know, and work at it from that perspective. And we have these tools through both the depth hypnosis and the focalizing that can be used to just, address what's going on in the nervous system. So oftentimes if someone is in a big state of reaction or resistance,
Hmm.
that's when I'll use focalizing more
Oh.
than depth hypnosis, because again, like Michael said, we don't need to story at all. I can
Hmm.
just, if we're in a client session, Angie, and resistance is coming up for you, then I'll just say, if that resistance is somewhere in your body, where would you find it? And invariably there's a tightness or a tension or a knot
Hmm.
somewhere. And
Hmm.
as soon as we find that, game is on, like we can start
Right.
working with that energy at that point. And, then we'll come back to wherever we might need to go from an age regression perspective. But, obviously if resistance is showing up that big, we need to work there first. And invariably, if resistance is showing up in the sessions that we're having, it's showing up in other places in your life.
Yes.
And it's probably having other places that it's keeping you from taking chances in your career, in your relationships, in things you want to create. It's having other costs probably.
That is so powerful. I'm just thinking as I was on my journey healing, and even sometimes now I find that my gut tightens and all of a sudden I'm like, nope, not going anywhere near that for whatever it is. Something maybe come up. I don't even know what. I was bit by a dog recently, and
Mm.
so I had a lot of resistance coming up to letting my guard down. I didn't want to take my
Yeah,
dog out for a walk. I mean, this is kind of a silly example, but for people out there listening who are like, oh, wow, you want me to go to something deep and painful? I'm not going anywhere near that. It's normal to have that resistance. And so
yes,
working through a somatic or a body practice, you call it focalizing, I use play and movement, whatever
right.
it is to help you find a way to release that from your body allows you to tap into that deep, painful thing without even knowing the story. I agree with you. We don't need to know the story to everything. In fact, I don't
Yeah,
even want to know the story anymore. For me, and those body practices can help you release that resistance that is showing up in so many different areas. I'm
sure.
one.
And honestly, like when we start working somatically, of course, you've got your methods, I have my methods, and there are other practitioners, there are other ones. Like we're actually kind of doing the same thing,
Yes.
with different technologies that are interacting with them. But that's the key thing. We're working in the body and healing our spirit. It's great stuff.
I love how you talked it earlier about how you were able to intellectually understand things, but it didn't stay, it didn't resonate. And that's where really the power of building that mind body connection is so imperative because we can think our way into and out of things, but until we get into the body and start to experience that body work, that stuff doesn't really tend to stick and stay around for very long, in my
Yeah.
experience. Do
No, I
you?
totally agree with you. We are intelligent,
Mhm.
willful beings, and yet there are things that no matter how badly we want to change them, we've been unable to.
Yes.
And when someone tells me a story like that, that's when I want them to do somatic work
Yes.
because I know you want to make that change and I know you try deeply and I can hear that you haven't been able to do it. And yet there is something that is keeping you from doing that. It is not your
Yes.
your own willpower. It is not a weakness of character. It is not an indictment of you or something to judge yourself over. It's just the thing. And we can work with it somatically, and then we'll see where we can get to.
I love that. That is so powerful. So many people think that, oh, there's something wrong with me that I can't change my thought processes. It's
Right.
not. There's nothing wrong with you. It's you get to explore what's blocking you. I think that's a much better way to not better. I think that's a much easier way to think about it rather than the heaviness of there's something wrong with me.
Right. And then, that's what I love about the somatic work is that there is really, it is not heavy to do somatic work.
No.
Because you don't have to get so much of certain therapeutic methods heavy up, the risk of re-traumatizing you
Yes.
because you have to go back into the story and then it's like, well, am I going to resolve it this time or am I just going to
Mm-hmm.
tell the story again
Mm-hmm.
and then, be real-live? We don't have to get into the story so much. We just need to get into how the body is holding the story and work there.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. I love it. Now, Barry, I could talk for hours with you about this, but I understand you have a gift for our listeners.
I do. Yeah, I want to offer two gifts actually
Okay.
to your listeners. The first one is a guided meditation. It's about 12 minutes long, so it's not long. I call it the Valleys of Peace, and it is a guided experience of essentially focalizing that helps you find in your body, without naming it, some areas of tension and bring some resolution to it. So it's something that you could practice as just, regularly
Mhm.
and just continue to re-regulate your system listening to that meditation. And then the second one is a ebook that I wrote many years ago, called What I Know to Be True. And it's a series of essays around the essential spiritual truths I've discovered in my lifetime and in my journey. And I ended up, they're short essays on each of them. And I had a friend of mine illustrate each of the essays. So think of it as like a picture book for adults but spiritual. So the practice that I suggest is like read one a day and just meditate on the on the piece of artwork, and then just revisit that from time to time. So those are the two gifts that I'm offering, and I think there's a link in the show notes to get to those.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just about to say we'll drop those in the show notes. Definitely go grab those. I love the idea of picture books for adults. I did that quite a bit as I was early in my stages of healing because it helped that inner child heal to have the story and the pictures. And
Great.
guided meditations I love. So I'm so excited. Definitely go
Okay.
grab those in the show notes. Also in the show notes, I'm going to drop a short 5-minute movement sequence that is a somatic practice where you can start to work into it when you're feeling that anxiety, that irritability, that resistance, something's coming up that you need to get some energy out. So go grab that too as well if you are feeling like that you need to get some energy out. Now, Barry, I'm going to ask you two questions. So, what is one of the biggest challenges that you've had on your healing journey?
Well, what comes to mind is early in working with Dr. Pacucci, and because I've been in that addiction pattern for so
Mhm.
long, I really couldn't get into my body.
Mm-hmm.
Even with focalizing, like we could do focalizing, but it just like I felt as if my body was a foreign object. And I really had to have a practice of feeling into my body. And I treated it as if I was rebuilding a relationship, reestablishing trust. So when I would feel intuitions in my body, I would recognize them and I would be thankful for them and I would, act on them. I was, building a relationship back with my body. And I think that that was an early hurdle to get over
Mm-hmm.
and big piece of my own healing and journey unfolding with having that relationship with my body.
I am with you on that. For so many years, I said I was a head with nothing connected to it.
Totally, like yeah, like there was
Yeah.
a just a steel plate right there.
Yep. Nothing below that. So I totally can relate to that. And then, so my next question is if we could sit down in 12 months, where would you want your journey to be that it's not now?
The thing that comes to mind in thinking about 12 months from now is just wanting more balance in my
Mm-hmm.
life experience. I still navigate a day job and then doing spiritual work. I navigate having a spiritual practice grounded in shamanism and working with guides, but yet I work in an ordinary, I live in an ordinary reality of stresses and traffic and
Mm-hmm.
people and, all that stuff. So I tend to more pendulate back and forth. And I really yearn to bring them together in a way that I feel that I hold them at the same time versus one or the other, or that I more frequently feel that I'm holding both of them than being in one or the other. So balanced.
So powerful. And once again, I totally can relate. I work as a nurse sometimes and I'm in my healing realm. And so they're
Yeah.
two, like it's a pendulum. I swing back and forth. So
Yeah.
definitely can relate to that one. Now, if people want to reach out and get in touch with you and learn more about the work that you do, which by the way is amazing, definitely go check him out. How do people get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, so I have a website. And that's the best place to start. It's medellum.com, Medelum. Medellum is a kind of made up word I use from Latin. It means healing light. And on the website, you can learn more about me. You can book a free consultation to learn more. Um, yeah, that's the best ways to catch up with me.
We'll also drop that in the show notes. So definitely everybody go check Barry out. And Barry, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your story and your incredible knowledge that you've learned on your journey.
Thanks, Angie. It's a pleasure to be with you and to be with your listeners as well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. And everybody, until next time, I'm wishing you light, shamanistic healing, somatic work, and joy on your journey. So until next time, bye, everybody.